Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be, and welcome to a post called Influential Yet Invisible Whistleblowers. If I try to identify the moment that caused me to change the course of my 20-year physics career and begin to add my voice to those complaining about the waste and illogic of many modern physics experiments, I conclude that it must have had something to do with Bibhas Dey's Dream Heron Chronicles website, on which he announced that he was going to expose the decadence and declivity of the contemporary physics establishment. He's just a guy in India who studied magnetohydrodynamics in a US university, I believe. I don't know how or exactly when I found his website. It was after the LIGO results were first announced about 5 years ago, but it probably happened when I was Googling LIGO skepticism after remembering discussions from my college classroom days about LIGO, COBE, BICEP, LHC, ice cube, neutrino experiment, sorts of skepticism. These were just things that professors would say that I remembered. They weren't on the test, but people talked about it. And so I looked on the internet for similar stories to kind of spur my memory, and I found the Dream Heron Chronicles that triggered these memories. And I've been running with these memories and amplifying these sorts of themes that this called to the surface ever since. And I found that he wrote a book, and he's very whimsical, and he's funny about these things. On the back of his book it reads, "Under the aegis of the goddess of truth, the author investigates Big Bang cosmologists. Slowly, abject scientific quackery had morphed into diabolical deceit. Increasingly strident rhetoric about advanced space-age technology and fantastic measurement accuracy was made to swirl around the deceitful discovery. Every power group that could be mobilized to protect the enterprise was mobilized to protect it. Every accolade that could be bestowed to whitewash over it was bestowed to whitewash over it. It was a very dark chapter of science. There is a Bengali proverb about sleaziness, lewd dancing going on behind the veil of modesty. Here we have an entire phantasmagoric orgy being played out on the world stage, among the noblest of noble intellectuals, and taxpayers are footing the bill." This was his opinion of big science, and he named his book The Falsifiers of the Universe. So he was much more extreme than me, but it did call to mind some of the things professors said. And I started writing about them on Quora. And nowadays, when I see other people who have taken what I've written on Quora or on my blog and they amplify it, putting it in their own words, I look at Bibhas Dey and see myself as a link in a chain of influential yet invisible whistleblowers. We are all reminding one another of important things that those with power want forgotten in many cases. Nobody wants anyone to say, hey, that expensive experiment was stupid. I have since found another link in this sort of chain, and his name is Alexander Unziker in Germany. And he may have never heard of Bibhas Dey, but he has been amplifying various LIGO skeptic themes, and I wonder who triggered him, what sort of chain got him going on that, because I think it is a pity that people like him and me are afraid to give credit to the whistleblowers who have influenced them, for fear of being tarnished with their image of crackpottery. But it's a natural consequence of the necessity to carefully defend your brand or public image. And the apostatic Unsicker has been attacked enough that I'm sure he understands this quite well. He has a PhD in neuroscience, but not physics, and so the physicists don't accept him. I think he teaches high school physics. He writes about Higgs skepticism, Kobe skepticism, about the map is the territory mathematical evangelism, and his belief that Einstein had a clever way to fix relativity that no one noticed. Now, I must admit that after coming from the academic physics community, I find his last two claims completely wrong. And the reason is, well, perhaps rather rudely expressed by one of his critics. Was Unsicker schreibt, hat Hand und Fuß, ist fundiert, informiert und zeugt von großer Belesenheit. Einstein ist nun mal eine Ikone, die fast magisch pinkelnde Hunde anzieht. And that means, what Unsicker writes makes sense and is founded, informed, and pulled from great readability. Einstein is just an icon that almost magically attracts pissing dogs. And this was someone named Egbert Scheunemann, who calls himself a relativity skeptic. When I read this, I sort of interpret it as that Unsicker, a high school math teacher with a PhD in neuroscience, has been educated about physics from a wide array of pop science texts that come from outside of the academic establishment, in which the truth of matters is hidden between the lines of densely encoded, jargon-rich papers. And the idea that Einstein magically attracts pissing dogs is a statement about the psychology of people who use Einstein's reputation to give themselves more credibility, to elevate themselves and claim ideological territory. So, after engaging in a widely circulated debate with a bunch of Einstein fanatics, I find this idea about Einstein magically attracting pissing dogs to be particularly true. I've since written a novel to explore the Einstein myth in more fanciful ways, but my concern with anyone who invokes Einstein is that they might become a weak link in the chain, because I think the Einstein myth is going to inevitably be destroyed, and it is far better to build your platform on basic geometry rather than on Einstein's reputation or even Dirac's reputation, because all of these past authors were all leaving out critical parts of the story, and they were all using a language that hid often what can be quite simple when you describe it in basic geometry, and you don't have to attach it to any famous name. You just say it's just geometry. But just because Unsicker might be wrong or myopic about Einstein or about the mathematical map being the territory in matters great and small, he might still be right about his initial eureka moment that the LHC's search for the Higgs particle was misguided. I also think he is right that LIGO is not delivering what it claims, and I've made lots of posts about these issues in the past. I agree that both of these projects are misguided, but the question that academics care about is on how many levels can you explain the sort of stupidity we're dealing with here? If you only identify and explain one layer of a 10-layer cake of stupidity, you failed the test. You must tear down the whole structure and expose every rotten post and beam, and prove that you are able to separate between two incompatible languages and frameworks. And whenever somebody comes to you with some sort of mix of the two, you have to be able to identify it immediately and refer it back to its foundational principles, because that's where everybody gets confused. It's when they take two languages that define space and time in different ways, and then they kind of mix them and mess up. If you can accomplish this task of complete deconstruction, you must be able to do so while maintaining the correct image and expressing everything in the correct style for the audience you seek to educate. And it's not even clear to me which audiences were allowed to educate. In short, you must be a chameleon and speak many languages. And probably the people who are allowed to speak have learned to kind of disguise their speech for certain audiences that they're not supposed to educate. And that's always, when when I see evidence of that, it makes me sad, partially because nobody ever told me about these sorts of systems, and it also makes me sad that people are deliberately trying to confuse children. I think it has effects outside of mere physics. It's a basic thinking. People are trying to learn how to think, and that means being very strict and not mixing things that shouldn't be mixed. Yeah. So Unzicker has entered the playing field of public consciousness in Germany by presenting himself as a rational academic, standing behind podiums and doing a good job of imitating the style of academic presentation. Whereas Bibhas Day and me, we've presented ourselves in more artistic fashion as free-thinking ex-academics who have a little bit of snarkiness. And we use whatever artistic motives we like to present our visions of what is going on in the world of science, refusing in some way to play the game by the rules, and that means we won't be allowed to speak to many people. Now, Sabine Hosenfelder, she created an image kind of like that for a while, the sort of a rule-breaking artistic image, but in the end, she's been brought on board and she's been distributing the party line about what everyone is supposed to say about various physics ideas, how great Einstein is and the kind of stories you're told in a classroom, but when you have a good teacher, they kind of, say something at the end of the lesson that gives you a clue about which part of the story is missing. And that the part of the story that's missing is never on the test. But if you remember it, 20 years later, it's like the key to sort everything out that you learned over the course of your career, to see where all of the missing pieces of the puzzle are hiding. Let's see. Unzicker does not allow himself to be artistic because he needs to come across as serious and only rebellious within the strict confines of the rules of academic discourse. And this will play well for a German audience for the reasons most people understand. Germans follow the rules, and sometimes I don't always understand why, because sometimes the rules don't always make perfect sense, but the idea of everyone following the rules all the time is probably a very important rule to follow. That's the reason. It's just a general principle, and you stick with it, and it leads to good outcomes, even if sometimes in the micro states you get strange results. So I'm off track. A person who desires to pace and lead the critics of academic physics, of which there are many, and they're not organized and they're all over the place. They can see something's not right there. A person who wants to do that while playing by the rules has to have the right face, marketing, and branding. And Unzicker seems to have found a niche of people who trust what he says. And I'm not sure why I haven't found my niche yet, but I'm sure it's out there. I mean, probably in America or something. But I can see the drawbacks of becoming the face of a sort of brand. You might be lucky and get some financial compensation for your work, which I haven't gotten any for all of my efforts. But this comes at a big cost to personal security. So if you want to do that, you really have to go in with a plan. And a man like Unzicker is unlikely to become a target of difficult people, while a woman might draw negative attention. When I toy with the idea of becoming a brand, I wonder if my brand would benefit from being ambiguously androgynous, as in, Kirsten could be a man's name or a woman's name, after all, and my face, depending on how the lighting is set up, it can look boyish or womanish. And I think there is power to be drawn from both masculine and feminine images, and a person who can draw from both of those is lucky. However, such ambiguity would come at a cost to the authenticity I would want my brand to have. And that authenticity is what I try to create through artistic YouTube videos. And I'm not sure how this image would play if it were amplified. I just crafted it to market my books. And so just sort of playing it by ear and playing my role as an invisible link in a chain of invisible yet influential whistleblowers who seem to have a knack for remembering things that many people don't want people to remember. So what I understand is that powerful people use ambiguities to hide their missteps within our collective blind spots. And this is what happens in a lot of big science experiments. But there are always people who remember. And this is why the disappearance of certain ideas from public discourse is often illusory. The truth bubbles up to the surface when people learn how to tune out distracting noise and tune in to the sorts of songs that are played by the invisible yet influential whistleblowers. Bipas Day, Unzicker, and I all caught glimpses of a picture, portions of a picture we probably weren't supposed to see, or it doesn't do us any benefit to see it. Our academic work trances broke too early, and now we don't really fit into the system as seamlessly as we once did. I like to think that we are all working to maintain a link to a chain of knowledge that will come out eventually and serve a beneficial purpose. If you would like to explore my apostatic physics perspective in more depth, I recommend my first nonfiction book. It's on Amazon. It's called Apostasizement. It will be the first of 3 books. And if you would like to read, I think, half of it, I posted that on Quora in a space called Myths of Modern Physics. And the people who've read it so far seem to like it. So thank you for watching. I hope you tune into the next video. Until next time.